President of Public Narrative.
And I'm Carol Summerfield, I'm Chair of the Board, and we are so pleased to welcome you to the 24th Annual Studs Terkel Award. And this is a night to honor journalism. It's an amazing crowd, it's been an amazing venue. We really want to thank you for coming and supporting us here, and welcoming our class of 2018, the Studs Terkel winners.
It's a phenomenal group of storytellers, and we are thrilled to not only have them in Chicago, but to be able to honor them. And Carol and I have quick duties here. We are have the wonderful job of thanking the people who made tonight possible. Quickly explaining a few rules of the silent auction. Did you know there's a silent auction, there's a silent auction, there's a silent auction, there's a silent auction?
Please, Ben.
And say a word quickly about public narrative.
And we will do this all in 5 minutes.
Yes, we will. And I'm a writer, so I have to read. I can't just speak extemporaneously. So I'm going to start by by doing the thank yous, and I'm going to say Richard H. Driehaus Foundation, thank you for supporting us at the anchor level.
And to the Robert R. McCormick Foundation and the Forum One, both of who supported us at the editor level, thank you, and thank you for coming. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much to the Chicago Tribune and the Medill School of Journalism, WBEZ 91.5 Chicago. Woo, represent. Vermilion Design plus Media, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Michael Burke and Robert Charles, and a thank you to me for supporting us. But more so, a thank you to my husband, Jim Gillespie, who probably deserves a thank you for so many different things that he's done to support me throughout this. So, yes. As you can imagine, he's long suffering. So, and thank you to those who supported us at the reporter level. Gordon Mayer Communications, who's also supported us by being our event coordinator. We're grateful to you. Yes, yay. The SAG-AFTRA Chicago Local Board, as well as the MacArthur Foundation. And finally, thank you to our wonderful Terkel Committee who planned the party, our phenomenal supporters at the host level, as well as our Terkel Award Committee of journalists who chose the winners. We like to say that Studs for years chose the winners, and then we put together a committee of the people that Studs chose so that they can choose the winners, so that we're not that far away from him, okay?
And thank you for those of you who helped put together tonight's auction. There are some lovely packages. Again, bid, please. The goal here is to check the bids at the end of the presentation. You'll have about 10 minutes to finish bidding. We will announce that we're closing the bidding, and then we would just ask you to catch up by the end of the evening.
Finally, I really want to say thank you to Studs Terkel. Some of you may not know Studs. He's more than just a name for us, and he's more than just a name on our award. He was actually the mentor for this organization when it was Community Media Workshop. He chose the award winners for years. He handed out the awards up until the year before he died, and everything we do tonight is to keep his work alive. Because Studs changed journalism. He was an important storyteller, activist, author, as well as a conscience for Chicago. He brought to life the people of this city, and he believed telling their stories was the highest calling any of us could ever have. He took great delight in saying he wasn't a journalist, yet he also called his oral histories guerrilla journalism. And throughout the year, we keep him alive in all our work, because all of our teaching is based on the pedagogy of Studs Terkel, which he probably would say if I actually said that in front of him. But I think he might hate it, and but I want you to know that the beauty of what we teach is based in what Studs did, because what Studs did was listen. He got people to think, and he got people to talk. And for those of you who don't know us, what we like to say about our work is that we are on a mission to change the public narrative on racism, sexism, and xenophobia. It's a small job, but somebody has to do it. And so, sometimes we simply say to people, we help journalists and people in nonprofits tell better stories.
And this is where I always weigh in, because an elevator pitch never actually talks about the complexities of what we face, what our organizations face, the challenges of the city, and then the complexities of the way that we actually solve them. And one of the things that we find is that they're very hard to put these narratives into sound bites. And so our goal is to take you from a quick, simple story into a meaningful and engaging story that actually pulls readers in, because the only way people are going to understand the problems is to understand the depth of the problems. And that comes through just marrying journalists with the people who live these stories every single day.
We need engagement, right? So we know this is not news to you. We know that you live this every day, most of you, those of you in nonprofits, as well as those of you in journalism. But we also know what you face in journalism is increasingly limited time, space, inches, and minutes to tell stories, as well as the funding to do it. So the other part of the equation in our nonprofit is that we are here to help you. Because we're involved with people on the ground, we do our best to keep you informed and bring journalists to the people who have the stories to tell. You know, you guys are a cynical bunch. And for people who don't know our organization, I'll call up and I'll say, "Hi, I'm from Public Narrative, I know you're a journalist," and they're like, "What's your angle? Who are you doing this for?" And I'm like, "You know, I just really want to help you." And it's hard for them to believe that, especially in this day and era, but that's our mission. As journalists, if you don't know me when I call, it's rough. But simply put, we like to think that our job is to be your legmen, another set of eyes and ears in the community. We're here to help the community. We don't pitch you. We would never pitch a journalist, but we will give you the opportunity to meet sources who we know are working on key issues in the neighborhood. And very often we step in with our speed dating programs because we see the disconnect between what is happening in the community and how it is being characterized in the news. So this is us, and we're almost done, because now it's time to get the pro up here, to get Cheryl Corley. What?
All right, so we're happy to have Cheryl Corley here. As you know, she is a correspondent for NPR based here in Chicago. You know her voice, and you probably know that she is also a Terkel winner, but did you know that she is actually one of the first Terkel winners? Cheryl was handed her award by Studs himself in 1994.
Cheryl, where you be, sweet pea?
You know, I want to say thank you to both Susie and Carol, and thanks to all of you who have come to celebrate great journalism, because we're going to be honoring some great journalists tonight. But there's one thing I wanted to do just right up at the top, because Susie was so conscientious about saying, you know, Cheryl, you know, you're a journalist, we're going to do the fine line, you don't have to ask for money for the organization and that sort of thing. And I went, I work for public radio, that's all we do. That's all we do. So you heard the pledge drive if you tuned in. So, you know, Public Narrative is a great, great organization. They do great work. So please donate to the organization so they can continue to do their work. The silent auction is just one little part of it. You know, the end of the year is approaching. Public Narrative should be on that end of the year donation list, and maybe even earlier. So I just want you to pay attention to that. So the Studs Terkel Award started in 1994. That means tonight marks the 24th year of the Terkel Awards. And it's really the 29th anniversary of Public Narrative, which was initially called Community Media Workshop. And the award goes to folks who fit into the Studs mold of storytelling. And there are about 70 journalists who've received the award. And, you know, when I got the award so long ago, it was just really a thrill to be in that inaugural group of Terkel winners. You know, especially since I was just 10 at the time and really had a long career ahead of me to come. So, joking aside though, one of my stellar colleagues who got the award last year, Kate Kagan, said, the Studs Terkel Award is really one of the most coveted awards in Chicago journalism, because it shows that as a journalist, you're just getting it right. You're getting it right. And for some of you here tonight, Studs Terkel is an author that you read. Maybe you're young enough to know him as the man who wrote the book for that musical Working that you heard about or performed in high school. Or maybe you heard him on WFMT radio, where he held court for more than 40 years, interviewing just a fascinating parade of people. Well, for some of us here tonight, he was someone we looked up to and admired, and some of us were lucky enough to call him a friend, and many of us knew his warmth, his humor, his passion that he really had for people, and his deep desire to make the world a better place, one story at a time. As was mentioned, I won the award in 1994 along with the legendary David Moberg of In These Times and M.W. Newman, who was a reporter at both the Chicago Daily News and the Sun-Times, who is considered one of the most prolific and influential newspaper men of his time. I was the pup of the group. I worked at WBEZ, I covered City Hall, I was the news director at the station. That was all before joining NPR. And Studs Terkel was just one of my heroes. He was a giant of Chicago with that great gravelly voice who taught us about the city and just loved the city so much. And he conveyed that to all the folks who came into contact with him. Now, that early celebration, we have a lot of people here, but that early celebration was a little bit more rowdy. I mean, Stud was alive at the time, you know. He knew how to have a good time. And there was a sense of community and joy in journalism. And I think that that's something that continues today. The joy in journalism and the joy in storytelling. Now, anyone can nominate a journalist to win the Terkel. And as Susie mentioned, in the early days, Studs chose the winners. These days, a committee of previous winners takes on that job. And this year, we were lucky enough to just have a very robust committee because we had a record number of nominations. And so we are getting the cream of the crop here tonight from that group of nominations. It was both amazing and really uplifting as we celebrate our 24th year. Now, Studs Terkel said the average American has an indigenous intelligence, a native wit, and it's only a question of kind of piquing that intelligence. And tonight's winners do just that, with the quality of their work, the excellence of their storytelling. They are people who find the voices and the stories behind the headlines and really elevate the voices of the people in Chicago who might otherwise not be heard. So it's time to meet the winners, and we're going to do that first in a video.
Cathy
Michael
Cheney,
Green.
Mike Green.
Darlene Glenn.
Kevin Cabal,
Odette Youssef.
I think journalism has always been important, but I think we've seen some really powerful examples recently of what journalism can do to elevate the voices of people who've historically been marginalized.
In an era where all eyes are in Washington, it's ever more important to keep a watchful eye locally. Odette is a thoughtful reporter with a great ability to translate complex stories into heartfelt radio pieces. That is the kind of dedicated reporter that Odette is.
If you want to dig into data, if you want to hit the streets and you want to get the real story or new angles on a story, you want Odette. She is a person who believes in the strength of writing and words and sounds to transport people and to make change.
Everyone that's out there talking about alternative facts, fake news, there's so much propaganda that you must have dedicated journalists like myself, true news hounds that were called to do this work to make sure that the public knows what's what, who's saying what, and to be objective.
She was a relentless, passionate, fierce pursuer of the facts, number one. And number two, she was a fierce advocate of diverse voices. She is Chicago. Cathy is the essence of Black Chicago. She knows the inner workings of this city. Cathy is just a Chicago treasure, and I'm just so glad that she is being recognized.
Journalism is so important today because of the speed that society is moving and the vast number of social media outlets that people are getting their information from. True journalism has become even more important as a filter for the daily news to bring solid, factual information.
No one worries more about a story. No one is earlier to a story than he is. If you look at Mike's work, you'll see his heart. It's just impossible to miss it. He has the biggest heart of anyone I know.
What makes him unique is instead of just parachuting in, shooting the assignment, and leaving, he takes the time to really get to know the subjects. He talks to them. He often follows up later in their lives to see how they're doing. So congratulations to my friend Mike, and thank you for honoring him.
Our mandate as journalists always has been to peel back the layers so that the people can see the truth.
Darlene is the voice Chicago needs right now. She's done the work that all that experience in journalism and life has led her to do so brilliantly.
Darlene Blanton is a treasure. She has been writing for the Chicago Tribune for a number of years, but her work in recent years as a columnist has brought new light and a new perspective to the city of Chicago that was sorely needed in our newspaper and across the community.
We live in a moment of radical unlistening, and part of this work of listening to others, of listening to one another, is to try to counter the conditions that we find ourselves in. And I think that journalism and verse journalism and having people from the democracy, from the city, by and large, tell the story and counter the monolithic narrative that we put forth about the city, about young people, about communities and working people, of communities of color in this city is essential, and we have the tools right in our hand.
Kevin and Studs also share this, again, this fundamental belief that life ought to be fair. I think it's what drives Kevin's work. He has nurtured and encouraged and supported all these young voices who are telling their stories through poetry and through hip hop. He's, like Studs, just incredibly generous with his talents. You know, Kevin's got this kind of fundamental belief that people have essential stories to tell, and that, of course, is what Studs so strongly believe.
Our first winner tonight is Odette Youssef. Odette, come on up. I'll say a few words before I give you your award. Odette, Studs used to joke about being called an oral historian, and he said, oral history was long before the pen, long before Gutenberg and the printing press. The difference is I have a tape recorder in my hand. Odette definitely knows how to use a tape recorder. She creates really elegant and insightful stories about immigration, about housing, and a whole variety of issues with very strong writing and a wonderful, wonderful use of sound. She's an extraordinary radio colleague, and I'm so happy to be able to present Odette with this award.
Wow, I'm kind of overwhelmed. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Susie. And thank you, Public Narrative. I actually I learned that I was going to receive this award on my first day back from maternity leave, which was an awesome way to come back to work from maternity leave. So I was thinking a little bit about what kind of remarks I would just say today, and I wanted to share a photo that is, I mean, this is really an excuse for me to get you all to admire how adorable my child is, but this is actually a photo that came to mind when I was trying to think about what the impact is that Studs has had. This tapestry next to our bed is a constant source of fascination for our son. He wakes up in the morning and he communes with it, and he's awfully babbling to it at night when he falls asleep. And it elicits the full range of emotions from him, from anger to laughter to coos, everything. And the point is that he never tires of the tapestry. And he can't turn away from the tapestry. And when I think about what we've all learned from Studs and the body of work that he's produced, you know, it's this metaphorical tapestry of experiences of people in Chicago. And when we continue to consume the news and journalism, when we pick up the paper and when we turn on the radio, it's because we're looking for those stories, because we can't turn away. And even if we don't agree with those stories, or we don't think we would relate to those people, we find that those stories are inherently interesting, and that's something that motivates me. The tapestry is beautiful, and it is interesting, and we cannot turn away. And I think that you know, everybody in this room understands the value of that tapestry, but we also recognize that it's getting more difficult for many media organizations to invest the resources that are necessary to create that tapestry and to support the journalists that bring those stories. And I wonder, you know, what would the world look like without that tapestry? You know, would we have known about the experiences of young children who were separated from their parents at the border if we didn't have those stories? Or the women who endured the worst kind of sexual harassment at the Ford Auto Assembly plant? Or homeless Chicagoans who repeatedly have had their belongings seized by you know, municipal employees? You know, as journalists, we don't fix those things. But our role in this tapestry is to bring those people's stories to public view. And the idea is that once they're known, you can't look away. They're out there, and maybe it's somebody else's job to fix it. Because once you know the story, you can't unknow it. So I guess what I want to say is that it's wonderful to be in a room with people who all share that belief. And I want to thank the people who have supported me in doing this work. I most notably want to thank Kate Kagan, who's already been mentioned once tonight. Kate has been an incredible editor, and she's encouraged me to take a lot of risks experimenting with different storytelling styles. And it's all with the goal of sharing the stories of people and communities in ways that are most resonant. I want to thank all my colleagues at WBEZ who've been pulled in, and I think at this point almost all of them have been pulled into edits to help my stories along. And of course I want to thank my husband Dan, he's a very excellent brain, and he's been wonderful to bounce ideas off of, and who continues to find my work interesting. So thank you so much. This is a tremendous honor.
Our next winner is Cathy Cheney, another colleague of mine, former president of NABJ Chicago, among many other things. Cathy has been a journalist in Chicago for decades, and she changes every place she works in for the better. Cathy does not accept the status quo when it comes to storytelling. She insists that news organizations cover the African American community in a more nuanced and more complete way. And you can feel the spirit of Studs in her work, because he said, in most cases, the person I encounter is not a celebrity, rather the ordinary person. And he said he came across ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. And Cathy Cheney works to make sure that news outlets, the journalism world, and the city pay attention to stories that should not be ignored, and stories that impact all of us in this city. So our thank you to Cathy Cheney.
Thank you. I'll be brief because if you know me, you know I don't like to talk about myself or bring attention to myself. I like to be on the other end. I am thankful to have been chosen by my peers to receive this honor. Journalism is a calling, and I knew at age 7 that this would be my path to giving back to my community, to use my platform to amplify marginalized voices. I know where I come from and whose shoulders I stand on. Ida B. Wells, Ethel Payne, my big sister Dorothy Tucker, Lou Palmer, Vernon Jarrett, and the list goes on. I hope to be like them one day and be a shoulder for others. So this honor and this award is not just for me. I must share it with all of you. And I also dedicate it to the Dynamic Dozen. They know who they are. The Ida B. Wells Society, Tiffany and Morgan and their team at the Tribe, Chancellor and his team at Chicagoist, my NABJ family, my Sun-Times family, who quickly learned how I get down, my immediate family, who puts up with me going 24/7. To all my media colleagues, please remember to lift as you can, because that's something that I always try to do. Thank you so much.
Picture taken so much. I'll get a big head or something. Michael, I'm going to have you wait just a little bit, but you're up next. I'm going to have you come up. Our next Terkel winner is photographer Michael Spencer Green, who has been shooting for the Associated Press for decades. And you'll see some of his work. I think he's coming up. You know, and as we look at his work, it lets you know why Michael's business cards once carried the title of visual poet. When Michael came to Chicago, he actually met Studs Terkel, and they just clicked. And his photographs make you think again of what Studs said about ordinary people, that they must count and that they do extraordinary things. And Michael has a reputation of documenting the most human of moments, even in very difficult circumstances, and of catching people in the act and making them count and treating them with respect and with care. Now, Michael is revered through the Bureau of the Associated Press and all throughout that company. And his work lets you know why. Because he is the embodiment, the visual embodiment of the Terkel tradition. He is a visual poet, indeed. Michael.
positions.
And we're gonna shift positions here. I'm gonna take a little bit of a seat here. Okay, that business card that said visual poet. I won't get into the story behind it, other than it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Until my bureau chief, who I'd known since college, got his hands on one of the business cards and said, "You turkey, how did you get these?" And I was very honest. I told him, "You paid for them." I'd like to thank you all so much. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm incredibly appreciative of Public Narrative for presenting me with the Studs Terkel Award. To be honest, I was pretty sure that the next time people were going to show up and say nice things about me in public would be at my eulogy. It means so much tonight to look out and see so many family members, friends, and fellow journalists who took the time out to attend and on a daily basis do what we do. I've been practicing this craft for over 40 years now, and I've considered it both a great responsibility and privilege to help share the stories of individuals I have covered in Chicago, the nation, and around the world. Throughout those years, I have traveled in the travels as a journalist. I have tried to carry myself in a manner where if I ever had to return, I would be welcomed. So far it seems to be working, so I think I'll stick with it. There are too many people here tonight to thank individually, especially since I'm supposed to keep this chat to 2 minutes. I promised you I would, Gordon. But you all know who you are. Two people who are not here tonight that I must mention are my 2 stepdaughters, Amelia and Lily, who over the past 25 years have made me a better listener, which has made me a better journalist. And I think Studs would agree with that last statement. Again, I thank you.
Thank you.
We gotta do this.
Our next winner is, see, I pulled the prize from the top and see the name. Our next winner is Chicago Tribune columnist Darlene Blanton, also a colleague of mine from NABJ Chicago. We celebrate Darlene for her stories and her absolutely beautiful writing. It's really a gift to all of us. And add to that her skill and her power to make us think. Because Darlene writes about race, she writes about politics, about controversial issues, and not always controversial. I love that column about us remembering our first job. But in her columns, like Studs, she does not hold back. And Darlene also practices what Studs preached. Studs said, "What I bring to the interview is respect. The person recognizes that you respect them because you're listening. And because you're listening, they feel good about talking to you." Most times, right? Darlene really opens people, and it's because of the respect that she brings to her work and the respect that she offers to those she interviews. Let's give her a hand. Logistics.
After 30 years at the Tribune, I am so excited to be up here. Thank you so much, Public Narrative, for this opportunity. It's just such an honor to be recognized for doing work that I personally feel that we're supposed to be doing as journalists. And that's telling stories about people. I've only been a columnist for a couple of years. Now I get to give my opinion about things. I don't get to sit down and talk to people as much as I used to, but the goals are still the same. And those are to tell the stories and help people gain a better understanding of each other. And that's really what I try to do every day. To receive this award in the name of Studs Terkel is just thrilling because he embodies what we strive for every day. I was doing a little research and I realized that Studs and I, though we never met, have a couple of things in common. He started out as, in law, and he kind of stumbled into this storytelling business. I did the same thing. When I went to college, I was majoring in pre-law and kind of fumbled with that for a while. And then toward the end, my advisor said to me, "You'd better choose a major, you're not going to graduate." So my roommate was a journalism major, and I said, "Oh my God, that looks interesting." And that's really a true story about how I ended up in journalism. And the interesting thing is, all these years later, I'm still doing it. She left the next year and went into PR. But the other thing that Studs and I have in common is that he once interviewed a bigwig in the Ku Klux Klan by the name of, what was his name? C.P. Ellis. Well, I interviewed David Duke in his home in New Orleans. So Studs and I kind of had that in common. Because like him, I believe that everybody has a story to tell. It was an experience. As journalists, I think we're always standing in someone else's shoes, and we take their personal and almost always complicated stories and spread them among strangers, and they're the heroes though, because they know that people are judging them and they're making assumptions about them, they're criticizing them, but they share with us because they believe, as we do, that their stories will make a difference in someone's life. And as journalists every day, that's what we strive to do. I am so grateful that I work with so many people who make it possible for me to do what I do every day. There's a great bunch of editors at the Tribune, and I see Bruce out there, and I see Peter Kendall, and they kind of let me do my thing, and I appreciate that so much. I think that's so important. Sometimes I wonder if they're gonna stop me, and they never do. They let me express myself the way I feel is best. There are other people too, and I'm just gonna mention them briefly. There's Lolly Bowen, who is my, Lolly is my litmus test for whether I miss my mark or not. If she tweets something I post, that I write, I get like really excited. She likes it. There's Marsha Lithcott out there, who's also my good friend, who, boy, we get into shouting matches about my columns, because, but she helps me stay on track, and I really appreciate that from Marsha. And then, of course, there is Mary Schmeek, who has set the bar so high, not just for columnists, but for every writer at the Tribune. And thank you so much, Mary, for helping me along the way. And I'm going to stop now, but I do want to say that this is a great time to be a journalist, but it's also a very difficult time to be a journalist. And there's so much to say and so much to write about, especially when it comes to politics. But we can't forget that there are other stories in Chicago and, across the country in general that needs to be written about. And those stories involve people who wouldn't ordinarily have their stories told. So I want to thank all of you again. I really appreciate this award, and I'm so appreciative of your support. Thank you.
More photos. Okay, there you go. Don't do that. You can give her another round. And our final Terkel Award winner tonight is in a different category, slightly. But a Terkel Award that Studs would really love, because it's the Uplifting Voices Award. And this year, we are giving it to poet, author, and educator Kevin Coble. And Coble actually met Studs, and his mentor was a previous, there you are, Terkel Award winner, the esteemed journalist and radio man, Rick Kagan. So we consider Kevin a kind of second generation Terkel winner. So, and as Studs said, there is poetry in every Chicago neighborhood. The expression of our beauty and our tragedy, our hope, our hardship, the promise of our humanity. Poetry that tells us something about who we are and what we hope to be. And in that spirit, Kevin Coble not only captures the city in his poetry, but he has also captured the hearts of thousands of Chicago's young people with his work at Young Chicago Authors and the area-wide poetry contest, Louder Than a Bomb, which I love. So now, here's Kevin Coble.
Thank you, Public Narrative, and Susie, and all of you for having me tonight. Thank you to Bill Ayers, who I think helped nominate me. I don't know if you do that here. Thank you, Alex Kotlowitz, for saying those beautiful words and for, just even knowing of my work. I'm honored. I want to thank one of my mentors, of course, Rick Kagan. I want to thank one of my mentors, Baba Hakeem Adabudi, who also introduced me to Miss Gwendolyn Brooks. And I think that the work that I do is in the tradition of Miss Brooks. I hope she called her verse, her poetry, verse journalism, and I think that's part of what I try to do. And Rick, of course, introduced me to Studs a few times before he transitioned, and Studs has been influential in shaping my focus of who to write about and who to even talk to in the city. So I'm working on a book of poems about Wicker Park in the 90s, and this is one of the poems that I think is in there. It's kind of shaped, Studs has framed my perception. Ode to the Waitress. Egalitarian nurse, 20% psychologist. You cure our ailments for an hour or whatever under any light night joint condition you find us. It's like you took a Hippocratic oath to kindness despite our advances and overly eager attention, which you cut down like a lumberjack. Despite the wage gap, mood wed to income, incomparable actress who brings me and my head-ass homies eggs at 3 a.m. with the grace of a film star in color vision. We all feel lovely when you call us honey. It's not that I can be whoever I wish in front of you, it's I can be myself finally without shame. High priestess of the golden nugget who bore extra napkins the morning my aunt passed. Temptress of the barbecue who touched my shoulder when dropping the tab, who loved me for a month and dropped me like the tab. You are all good to my father who holds your hand every time for too long, and I tell him, Pop, stop, but I get shooed away because this is light work and a heavy lift and maybe a moment to catch your breath in the whirlwind of the weeds. You are a beautiful breed, excuse us all. Who sees, who serves the people more, our needs and insane demands, our idiot synchronicities? Who is more resilient than a mature dervish wheeling side dishes and heaping pots, ballerina of the foretop? You take us in and return us to the world fuller than when we came. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I gotta go to Wicker Park now, right? Look for the waitress. Well, we have two more things to do tonight. First, we have to briefly hear from Studs one more time. And second, Michael Burke will have a message he wants you to hear. And then I think there's some singing thing that happens too at the end of this. So let's take a look.
About 20 years ago, I found myself lost somewhere in northern Italy, the town of Brescia, the home of Pope John XXIII. I wandered into a trattoria, a restaurant, and there the old woman said, Americano? Si, signora. What city? Chicago, signora. Chicago, she said. Boom, 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 boom. No, signora. Chicago is more than that. Far, far more. Parade is as natural to Chicago as a river that flows upwards. On any given Saturday, the sun is shining and the weather is right, you'll find a Polish parade, a Mexican parade, a Croatian parade, a Puerto Rican parade, a Ukrainian parade, a Black Mud Pelican Day parade, and of course, the most celebrated of all, the St. Patrick's Day parade, which is often more than a display of pride, a not too subtle show of power. The Irish came here following the Germans, escaping the potato famines of the old country, singing sad songs, and counting pervasively those signs. No Irish need apply, and the Paddy had to work with pick and shovel to earn his daily bread, and to find his way upwards very often. To see that light, he entered politics. Chicago politics for almost a century has been Irish in influence. For the past 40 years or so, our mayors successively, Kelly Kennelly, Daley Byrne. And now new immigrants to the city, new people, the same old aspirations. The quest continues, and so does the march.
I've always thought that Chicago, the city motto, we have a city motto that means herbs and horto, which is city and a garden. And for years I've been campaigning to have it changed to Ubi est mia, which means where's mine?
Mike Royko, Chicago's most popular columnist, an observer of the human comedy that is Chicago.
While you're putting your hands together, put your hands together again for Cheryl Corley. Put your hands together for Gordon Mayer and the committee that put this evening together. And put your hands together for Susie Schultz, the hardest working woman in show business. Back in 2004 or 2005, it was either the year Tracy Baim or Alex Kotlowitz became Terkel winners. This party was held at the Arts Club. Now, if you don't know it, the Arts Club is a rather posh, private club up in Streeterville. And the awards had been given, the food had been eaten, the Curtis Black Trio was packing up their instruments, and Studs himself came toddling past me. Toddling is the only verb you can use. He came toddling past me, and he zoomed over to the bar. "I'll have a cognac," he roared. The young bartender sort of pulled back and smiled. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have cognac." Now, this was back in the day when Studs would say he was deaf as a post. So he raised his voice. "I'll have a cognac." The bartender apologized again. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have cognac." Studs was shocked. "You don't have cognac? For Christ's sake, this is the Arts Club." My name is Michael Burke, and I have two claims to fame. First, and I think I'm the only person left in Chicago who can say this, I am not running for mayor. The night is young, however, so it may still happen. I'm not sure. We'll see. She will. Second, my husband, Robert Charles, and I are in love with public narrative. I started as a satisfied customer, taking courses, getting trained, taking advantage of networking opportunities, enjoying the parties. Then a guy named Mike Roach, who's here tonight, finagled me onto the board, talked me into it. I was on the board of directors, served a couple of terms as board chair. I followed in the footsteps of two people who are here, Marianne McMullen and Nicole Gotthelf. And I have to say those were some pretty big shoes to fill, and I don't usually wear pumps. So that was pretty good. I now volunteer on the Leadership Council for Public Narrative. And Robert and I support public narrative, I imagine, for the same reasons that you do. For us, it comes down to two words: value and values. What do we value? Robert and I love Chicago. We love this big, beautiful, brutal city. Despite its faults and inequities, for all of its greatness and good, we are in love with this city. We also believe journalism is absolutely essential to making a society healthier and more honest. We subscribe to the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and we read the Omaha World Herald online. We also respect the power of storytelling. Stories help us make sense of life with all of its sorrows, with all of its joys. Stories matter, and we know that public narrative matters. And just what is public narrative? Is it Susie? Yes. Is it Angela? Yes. But it's also each of you in this room tonight. You matter and your story matters. And public narrative is also the 3,000 people Susie reaches with trainings every year. They matter. Their stories matter. We heard no better testimony to this than from tonight's Terkel winners. And here's one key fact you should know. The 3,000 people public narrative trains every year, 60% of them are people of color in low-income communities. Susie is building, through public narrative, a coalition of narratives of color. Now let's talk about value. We're convinced, Robert and I are convinced, that $1 invested in public narrative does more good for more people living on more streets and more neighborhoods than $1 invested anywhere else. This dollar goes a long way. And Susie and Angela steward these dollars with care and thought and integrity, and we know as sure as hell, you're not buying cognac. So let's face it, it's not easy being in the media these days. It's not easy being public narrative these days. But journalism and public narrative are both needed today more than ever. We did a study last year. Nonprofits, especially those run by people of color, said communications is one of the top 3 things they need. Here's the catch. Most foundations don't prioritize it. 63% of nonprofit leaders named communications as a top need. 31% of foundations called it a top need. The work is undervalued. Now I know many of you are stepping up. You're here, and I thank you. But I also want to thank you for, let's call them gifts yet to be received. I'm asking you to step up again. And you can step up in a couple of ways right now. There's an auction over here. I'm trying to outbid Sarah Karp for the Hamilton tickets. Gordon Mayer's trying to outbid me for the kayaking tickets. You can also make a contribution, and if you've already made a contribution, like Robert and I have, you can make another contribution. Did you know for every $200 you give, public narrative can provide a training in one more neighborhood leader? For every $1,000, we can offer one more entire class for a class of neighborhood leaders. So please give what you can. This auction is going to close soon. Your contributions will be most helpful, and I recognize that I'm asking you to stretch. Robert and I are stretching to make this happen. We've got some friends and colleagues who are going to be passing out envelopes. To those Catholics in the room, this will feel very familiar. And I'm told the, what are they called? Protestants will be familiar with this too. Sorry, Michael James Jeremiah Burke. Sorry, it's just, anyway. That would be the pull quote if this speech was newsworthy. You know the cause is worthy. You know the work is tough. You know you will be helping people from all walks of life in all neighborhoods throughout Chicago, and you will help them matter. So as you are giving as generously as you can, I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. And this is the physical motor skills test portion of the evening. I'm going to ask, we had some great Terkel winners tonight. First of all, let's give them another round of applause. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. I'm going to ask tonight's Terkel winners to stand. And if you're already standing, wave your arm. And remain standing. If you are a past Terkel winner, stand and remain standing. So if you've won a Terkel in the past, please stand and remain standing. If you've won any Terkel Awards in the past, please stand and remain standing. Please stand and remain standing. If you have taken a class through public narrative, please stand and remain standing. If you've received coaching through public narrative, please stand and remain standing. If you've participated in a training through public narrative, please stand or remain standing. If you have volunteered for public narrative, please stand and remain standing. And if you have attended any of our events, including tonight, please stand and remain standing. You all matter. We thank you for taking a stand. Together, there is nothing we cannot do. I'm going to ask you to do a couple more things. First, remain standing and give our award winners yet another round of applause. I'm going to ask tonight's award winners to join me on stage up here because we have to do some singing. But we have an ace in the hole. I want to ask you to help me introduce Jamila Woods, who is a hip-hop star and actually knows how to sing. Thank you, Jamila. And we're going to cue the band and let Jamila take the stage.